Hello, everyone. Today on the interview series with Bar and Bench, we have with us Rahul Bajaj. On graduating from law school at Nagpur University in 2017, Rahul went on to work with Trilegal for a year. Post this, he pursued his BCL from University of Oxford as one of the very few persons with disabilities across the globe to have gotten the Rhodes Scholarship. He also completed his MPhil in law at the University of Oxford. After this, he came back to India to work as a judicial law clerk to Justice D.Y. Chandrachud at the Supreme Court for a year. Soon after, Rahul was associated with Vidhi Center for Legal Policy as a senior resident fellow. He is currently attorney at ERA Law, an IP and civil litigation firm. Welcome to the interview series by Bar and Bench. It's a pleasure to have you on board.
Thank you so much, Jelsyna. It's wonderful to be here, and I followed your series closely. I tend to listen to some interviews from time to time, so it's a real honor.
If I may start off by asking you, as the first blind Rhodes Scholar from India, what was your experience like studying at the University of Oxford? And what were some of the inclusive measures present on campus at Oxford that you wish you had while completing your undergraduate degree from Nagpur University?
Yeah, thanks for that. I think so. I should tell you one interesting tidbit before I answer your question. So actually, I used to think that I was the first blind person to get the roads from India. But actually, I found out that there was another person who got it before me who was visually challenged. Although he became blind much later in life, he was diagnosed with a progressive retinal condition when he went to Oxford. But despite being a Rhodes Scholar and having all the accolades that come with it, his view on his disability was very regressive. So no one quite knows about him or his disability, which I find quite depressing actually. The fact that even someone in such a position of relative influence does not want to, confront their disability head on. But anyway, to answer your specific question, the advantage of being at a university like Oxford was that it was well resourced. So they were able to provide me reading materials in accessible formats. In law, that is a critical ingredient to succeeding, as you are aware. So, they had the Bodleian Law Library at the University of Oxford has a unit that makes available reading materials in accessible formats well in time before your classes if you give them the reading list. So that was one significant contribution that they made. Other than that, just in terms of providing me mobility instruction to help me to help me acquire familiarity with the university, with the places that I would have to frequent, and giving me additional support from time to time, such as someone who could help me with certain visually oriented elements of the courses that I was pursuing. These were some support measures that they took. I think in terms of what we can learn from this in India, I suppose the way our system works is that a disabled person is left to her own devices. So if you are, resourceful and wealthy, you can provide for yourself and you can have the support system you need. Otherwise, there's very little by way of institutional support that you have. So what we could do is have disability cells, equal opportunity cells on disability rights in every law school, at least at the national law schools to start off with, which can serve as a nodal office for disabled people to get the academic and non-academic support that they need. And then there can be processes to ensure that you prepare a student support plan for every disabled person once they get into law school, and which contains all the additional measures that they would need, and sensitization for the faculty, fellow students, and staff members at the law school, so that they have the know-how to assist these students in the best manner possible. I don't buy the argument, Jelsyna, that our law schools can't do this. It's just that till now it's not been something that has received the kind of priority that it deserves.
Right. Got it. That was very insightful. Moving on, you mentioned about the specific library that was made accessible for persons with disabilities at the University of Oxford. Despite this, were there any other challenges that you faced while accessing material or resources on campus at Oxford, and how did you navigate through the barriers?
So one aspect that I sometimes struggle with, although like I said, generally they would provide reading materials on time.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes, there was some miscommunication in terms of them being able to give me the readings that I needed well in time for my classes. And at Oxford, the reading material is voluminous, so you have to get through a lot to be able to meaningfully participate in every class.
Right,
Sometimes the reading materials might reading materials would arrive quite late, and then I'd have to scramble to finish it. So that was a
right.
bit of an issue, but otherwise my challenges at Oxford primarily were non-academic, Jelsyna, to be honest with you,
Got it.
in the sense that I'd never lived away from family, let alone living in a foreign country,
Got it.
and being able to figure out how to manage everything from cooking my own food to getting around the university from one college to the other. Oxford is really quite large, so the
Right.
colleges are set up in such a way that it's kind of a maze.
Mm-hmm.
So figuring out all of that, how to sort of effectively stay well organized, those were real challenges, and that's a challenge for everyone, from a lot of people from India who go abroad, but it
Right,
becomes doubly so if you are disabled like I
right.
am. And the other aspect I would say there is that uh, while universities like Oxford are great in terms of providing academic support to disabled people, they don't
Mm-hmm.
really provide any non-academic support. So while I
Mm-hmm.
was assured that I would be given some non-academic support before I went, it was kind of withdrawn when I went there. So then, but I was lucky to be on the Rhodes Scholarship because the Rhodes Trust kind of stepped in and ensured that I had the additional support I needed in terms of
Right.
having a support worker
Got
from
it.
time to time.
Got it. Got it. That's great. All right. So, how were you able to use your identity as a Rhodes Scholar to further the cause of the disabled community?
In India, you mean after coming back, or in what
Yes, after
context do
coming
you mean?
back. Yes.
See, I've been, supporting these causes that I currently support for a long time, whether it is making the legal profession more disabled friendly, disability rights advocacy,
Right.
and one new cause that I've taken up recently has been digital accessibility in terms of making apps and websites more disabled friendly and
Right.
encouraging other people with disabilities to apply for similar scholarships. I guess the one
Right.
difference that the Rhodes made is that it sort of gave me some amount of legitimacy and credibility. So now when
Mm-hmm.
I contribute to these causes, at least some people take me a little bit more seriously
Mm-hmm.
and aren't as dismissive
Mm-hmm.
or as ignorant in terms of or willing to ignore what I'm saying as easily as they
Right.
may have otherwise done.
Right. Right. Following up
So
from this, right.
it does give you a megaphone, I suppose, through which to broadcast your message.
Right. Following up from this, there's an underlying, approach of people being valued only if they have accomplished something significant, which is starkly opposite to what the UNCRPD seeks to establish. That every individual is a valuable human being, and there is intrinsic value in each individual for being themselves, regardless of their achievements. What are your views to avoid comparison between iconic persons with disability like yourself and other persons with disability who may not have made a mark for themselves?
So it's very kind of you to call me iconic because very often I think of myself as being in the second category, at least in some context. I think this is very contextual in terms of who's iconic and who has not made a mark.
Mhm.
Because while I may be great when it comes to having won the Rhodes Scholarship and all that, which is also quite arbitrary sometimes. So I wouldn't, deify someone just because they got a scholarship because you never quite know what works in your favor on that particular day.
Right.
But and someone else who may have come from a very economically underprivileged background and who may have managed to get a good education and a decent job, even if it doesn't pay, but a tier one law firm does. In the context of their lives, they have made it big. So I don't think these comparisons are really fair and even the characterization of someone as being iconic and others not being is perhaps it is not accurate, I would say.
Right.
But the other thing I would say is that this is a real challenge. What you've pointed out in the sense that we tend to in the disabled community sort of when some people achieve great success, we tend to regard them as the benchmark and then
Right.
expect everyone else to follow suit
Correct.
without recognizing that not everyone may be able to do as well or cope as well with their disability. So I
Correct.
don't think that's fair. I think we have to work towards a situation where everyone is given the support that they need and is able to lead their lives in the way they want, rather than
Right.
having to aspire to a certain model of
Right.
what success looks like.
Right. Right. And Rahul, you also mentioned about the initiative that you're currently engaged with, that is the Mission Accessibility Initiative, which seeks to
Yes,
promote digital accessibility for persons with disability. Can you tell me a little
yes.
more about it, and how do you think the legal fraternity could help you in furthering this cause?
I'm glad you asked that question, Jelsyna, because this is a cause that's very dear to my heart. Our lives are increasingly becoming digital, and therefore
Right.
access to the digital marketplace is fundamental to
Right.
meaningful participation in society. The apps that we
Right.
use for ordering food, groceries, online payments, e-commerce, shopping, our clothes, everything nowadays we tend to buy online. And the
Mhm.
assumption generally is that just because it is online, it's going to be disabled friendly and it will bridge the digital divide, bridge the divide that exists otherwise in the physical world. And that's not really the case very often when it comes to the use of digital technology for persons with disabilities. Because
Right.
if technology, if apps or websites are not designed with accessibility in mind, they can compound and reinforce the barriers that exist in the physical world as opposed to breaking them down. And
Yeah.
therefore, with two other lawyers, one of whom is Amar Jain, who's a certified accessibility professional and a corporate lawyer, I've been working on this initiative to put together, really in a mission mode form, a strategy to work constructively with apps and websites to help them become more disabled friendly, both public and private. And it's something that our law requires. So digital accessibility for the disabled is a right. If a service provider is doing it, they're not doing anyone any favors by that. It's just a right that everyone has, like every able-bodied person, every disabled person has to be able to access the digital marketplace on equal terms. So the idea really is to see how we can constructively engage with those service providers that are willing to take our inputs on board,
Right.
uh, and make their platforms better for the
Right.
disabled, and those that are not, to litigate against them, and so that legal consequences can follow for a failure
Right.
to comply with the rights that we as disabled people have. And we are very
Right.
clear about maintaining good hygiene around this. So for people that we litigate against, we are not going to have them as our clients for consultancy, and for those who are we are consulting with, we are not going to litigate against them, just as a good hygiene practice. But otherwise, both options are very much on the table, because we feel that we need to sometimes litigate also for those who are simply unwilling to take this seriously.
Mhm.
And the support that the legal fraternity can provide is enormous, in terms of, one aspect is funding this, because we at this point put in all our efforts in filing complaints, filing notices,
Right.
taking this up in courts on our own on a pro bono basis. If we could get some support for that, some support for paying our volunteers. We have a bunch of volunteers at the National Law School, Bangalore, who are
Right.
supporting us in doing this work on an unpaid basis right now. So if we could support them, and if we could then have someone, who can do this for us full time, those are
Mhm.
some things that we need support with. And there's a real need in terms of how the legal profession can support us. One other key way is to work with us in sensitizing service providers about their obligations under our disability rights law, to make their platforms accessible. So I'll give you an example of a recent case that I was involved in the court of the Chief Commissioner for Persons with Disabilities, and the lawyer for a major private healthcare provider that shall remain unnamed basically said, that, well, we are not legally obligated to do this, but out of goodwill for
Oh,
Mr. Bajaj, we will just do this. And I was, a little offended by that, because it's not a question of goodwill. I
right,
mean, it's a rights-based issue that we have to take up in terms of, what people deserve as a matter of right. So it can't be seen as something that you do out of the goodness of your heart. So I
right,
think that perspective is really important, and law firms can concretely that have service providers that have their platforms in these sectors: food delivery, e-commerce, banking, telecom, social media. They can work with us in helping service providers build accessibility by design into their platforms, have it be part of their standard operating procedures, and we can give them technical guidance and legal guidance on what they can do. But without the support of the legal fraternity, proactive support, there's little that we can actually do.
right, right. I wish you all the very best for this initiative, and I hope you get all the support that is required.
Thank you,
Moving on.
Jelsyna. I appreciate that.
Yes. Moving on, Rahul, you mentioned that this is a project that you're working on as on a part-time basis along with your full-time IP litigation practice. So how do you really
Yes.
balance your interest in IP law with disability law? How do you go about managing both of these?
So that's a question I get often. But honestly, it's not as big a challenge as some people might think. I mean, of course, there are only 24 hours in the day, and you have to sort of sometimes prioritize one thing, sometimes try to find time for the other. But if done well, these things can actually complement each other, because any kind of work that you're doing day in and day out, you get saturated with it, and you need something else to do that sort of takes your mind
Right,
off what you're doing
right,
otherwise. So it really serves as an opportunity to step away from, because I don't think I would be happy if I were doing either thing alone.
mm-hmm.
So because IP law is something that is something that I'm passionate about, and that you know having a as a legal professional, that's what sort of gives me my bread and butter, and it's also something that intellectually satisfies me. But
Right,
also, at the same time, I would feel that I wasn't using my legal talents effectively. If I didn't support a cause that is so dear to my heart, and where my skills and training can practically be useful. So that's how. So I see these two things, as feeding into each other, really.
right,
And sometimes there are very interesting synergies that come through this kind of work. You find interesting intersections between different areas of the law that you may not have otherwise thought about. So IP, and apart from disability rights, the other area that I'm interested in is in constitutional law. So
mm-hmm.
I do some work on the academic side, at least on the intersection of IP and constitutional law. And if I was only interested in one of those two areas, I wouldn't have really been able to think of those intersections.
Right, right. So, moving on, Rahul, you had mentioned about, the legal fraternity needs to be sensitized on the issues of disability rights or disability law. So, in this
Correct.
regard, do you think that the Bar Council of India should make courses on disability law mandatory in all law colleges? There are some colleges like NUJS, which has recently began offering elective courses on disability law. But do you think that
Yeah.
they should be made mandatory by the Bar Council in all law colleges?
Oh, definitely. I think there's a real need to mainstream disability rights discourse in our law schools. And the Bar Council can play an important role in that regard by making it part of the mandatory curriculum.
Right.
But to be honest, and I might get into some trouble for saying this, but I'm going to say it anyway. I haven't had a very positive experience with the Bar Council of India in the past. So when I appeared for the All India Bar exam in 2017, they said that they themselves were not aware of the law actually, in the
Okay.
sense that they told me that my writer for that exam
Mm-hmm.
could be either someone who was in 12th grade, or
Oh,
no more than 12th grade, or from a different stream. Now, the issue is that it's an open book exam, so you
right.
need someone who can
Navigate
find
well.
out things for you from the bare text and from the books. Like you can tell them that, look, read section 9 of the Arbitration and Conciliation Act to me in
Mm-hmm.
response to an MCQ. But if they don't understand how an act is structured, how sections are structured, how to read legal language, it's very, very difficult for them to be able to read that kind of information out. Now, the
Right.
guidance by the government, by the Ministry of Social Justice and Empowerment at the time, there were guidelines they had issued in 2013, which said that from the same stream you could have a writer, but
Mm-hmm.
the only thing is that they must be one step junior to you. So if I am giving the
Okay.
bar exam, it would probably have to be someone who's in their fifth year,
Right.
who's starting their fifth year, so that they can't sort of assist me in the exam, which is fair.
Mm.
But the bar council kept on insisting of and having someone from a different stream, and actually, then I wrote a representation to Mr. Mishra, Manan Kumar Mishra, who was the chairperson. Nothing happened.
Mm-hmm.
2 3 times I followed up, and then I also then one other issue thing that they created an issue with is, so I wanted to then give my exam on the computer, because I thought that if it is open book and I can actually reference the reading materials on my own in my computer, then that kind of would reduce the role of the writer.
Right.
But then, there was an objection that they initially raised, saying that you can't bring in electronic devices. And one of them said, that we are told that this technology actually reads out answers to you. I mean, that's such an absurd sort of
Oh,
objection that they raised,
right.
coming from a body like the Bar Council. But that was their thought process. Eventually, I had to write multiple letters to even get the permission to give my exam on the computer, which is again something that government guidelines clearly allow for.
Right.
So, given my past experience with the BC, I am not too hopeful of anything
Right.
progressive coming out of that body on disability rights.
That's that's really disheartening. Um,
Yes.
right. And moving on, what are your views on using terminologies like special or challenged or Divyangjan as opposed to identifying oneself as blind? Do you see this as esoteric jargon, which augments the dichotomy between the disabled and the non-disabled?
I think so. My personal view on the matter is that we can I mean we should say it as it is. Using these terms like differently able, specially able, divyang, it kind of just obscures the real challenge that someone is facing, and it's just sort of it puts them on a different pedestal.
Right.
And I think that if someone is disabled, they should be called as such. If they are blind, then they are blind, and it's as simple as that. I don't see the need to devote our time and energies on sort of trying to use euphemistic terms
Right.
to refer to that. Instead, I'd focus on actually improving the quality of their life,
Right.
materially, and
Right.
taking steps in that direction.
Got it. And Rahul, what are your views on the draft National Policy for Persons with Disabilities that was recently released in May 2022?
So I think I've been part of several consultations on the policy, and have also put together some comments that are being
Mm-hmm.
submitted to the government now. We will
Mm-hmm.
see how that process plays out. But my view on the policy is that in some, like, it's very aspirational. It makes a lot of good noises,
Right.
but it's short on substance in terms of how it is going to achieve what it sets out to do. So just to
Right.
give you an example, it has 18 steps that it lists out in the accessibility chapter in
Mm-hmm.
terms of, making sure that we make audio description available, subtitling available, we make apps and websites more disabled friendly, physical accessibility, transport accessibility, on all those things. But what it does not do is have quantifiable parameters that, okay, we are going to make 50 government and 25 private websites accessible within 1 year. That
Right.
after 1 year, we're going to do an audit to see how far this has actually happened.
Right.
So, in the absence of quantifiable parameters to evaluate success, and in the absence of a robust monitoring mechanism, it's very difficult to actually assess. It seems more like in the nature of political promises rather than well thought out guarantees to persons with disabilities. So what I would think would be more helpful to do in a policy, because the idea behind a policy of this nature is to implement the law, right?
Right.
So the law is already there, and it has everything. I mean, of course, it's not perfect, but it has a lot of things that we need.
Right.
So the policy should really try to implement what the law guarantees, should demand action plans from ministries in terms of how they are going to discharge their mandate under the law with quantifiable parameters and targets, and it should have a monitoring mechanism.
Right. Got it. Got it. And coming back to your time, since you were a judicial clerk of Justice D.Y. Chandrachud,
Yeah.
the disability law jurisprudence evolved significantly during your time and beyond. Can you share your experience on the whole as a judicial clerk to Justice Dhananjay Chandrachud?
So I had a really positive experience working for him. He was in many ways a model employer when it came to providing me the additional support that I needed, such as extra time sometimes to do my work because I had to figure out how to access documents that were inaccessible to me. Or, the one big step that he took was sort of helping make the Supreme Court website more accessible, because it had an image-based captcha, which sort of shut me out at the threshold, because
Right.
the software that the blind use, which is called a screen reader, that
Mm-hmm.
speaks out what is given on the screen, that software doesn't work with captchas, image
Right.
captchas. So he made sure that that they had a text captcha on the website, and he
Right.
put out an instruction in his first list saying that all documents filed in his court had to be filed in soft copy form, and not just soft copy, because people think that if it is soft copy, it will be disabled friendly. That is not true. It
Right.
also has to be, sometimes what people do is, and this is very common in our system, that they print out documents, they take signature of it, of whatever authority is needed, and then they scan it. And when they
Right.
scan it, the quality of the scan is very poor.
Correct.
So, if you try reading it with a screen reader, it will just read it out as random symbols and numbers rather than actually telling you what the text says.
Right.
And in the law, precision is extremely crucial, as you know. So,
Correct.
therefore, what he said is that, they should not print and scan them, but they should make them available in his court in native digital format. Like you can use digital signatures, or you can just sign the last page, not print and scan the whole thing. And
Right.
that also, I mean, of course, sometimes people did not do that, but a lot of times they did.
Okay.
At least sometimes they did, and that all those things really helped out in terms of making it a positive and affirming experience for me.
Right.
And yeah, I mean, he was very open to my inputs on the disability rights cases that came before him in terms of research inputs and
Right.
what other countries were doing, things like that. So it was
Right.
quite a positive experience overall.
Wow. That's really nice. Moving on. So the UNCRPD recognizes disability as an evolving concept and defines persons with disabilities as those with long-term physical, mental, intellectual, or sensory impairments, which in interaction with various barriers may hinder the full and effective participation of individuals in society on an equal basis with others. In this context,
Right.
which approach, according to you, must be taken by persons in authority while framing and implementing policies? The equality approach, which is a one size fits all and looks at an individual from the lens of the able body, or the liberty approach, which looks at individuals on a case to case basis?
The latter, it has to be a case to case based approach. And this you see coming out strongly in the Supreme Court judgment in Vikash Kumar versus UPSC,
Right,
where in the context of reasonable accommodation, they say that it has to be based on dialogue with the particular individual.
right,
And, it can't be a one size fits all approach because every disabled person's needs are different.
correct.
And we have to modulate our response accordingly. Now,
Hmm.
one thing that I will say here, which is particularly disappointing, and I've written an op-ed about it, is
Mm-hmm.
this recent judgment of the Supreme Court, in a case concerning the grant of compensation to a person with a permanent disability who sustained a motor accident injury.
Right,
And he came to the Supreme Court saying that the amount of compensation that was granted to him was inadequate,
right.
and he was rendered permanently disabled at the age of 5 by virtue of the disability that he sustained.
Hmm.
And the Supreme Court, while enhancing the compensation, made some rather unfortunate remarks about the capabilities of disabled legal professionals. It
Mm-hmm.
said that physical fitness is
Hmm.
essential to be a proficient advocate, and that because this person was permanently disabled, he would
Hmm.
not be able to perform as well as a quote unquote normal lawyer in terms of
Right,
discharging his everyday responsibilities. So
right,
I guess one thing that is problematic about that is just the use of this language,
right,
which was really unfortunate. And this is again something that the Supreme Court talks about in Vikash Kumar in the segment called the language of our discourse,
right,
where they say that we should use affirming language and dignifying language to refer dignity affirming language to refer to people with disabilities.
right.
And the other aspect to it is also that, if this is actually the case, I mean, if it is the case that
Mm-hmm.
the court itself admits that people with disabilities have such a hard time navigating the profession, legal profession, and
Right,
our court system, then shouldn't the court itself take some responsibilities for it and do
right.
something about it, because nowadays we follow the social model of disability,
Correct.
which says that the society is equally responsible for the barriers that exist on the path of a disabled person. So if
Right,
it is the case that our courtrooms are not navigable by disabled people, then what is
right,
the Supreme Court doing about it on the physical accessibility front, at least, is
right,
something that they must introspect on.
right. Following up from the your answer from the previous question, what do you have to say about
Yes.
the Rhodes Scholarship age eligibility criteria? Whether persons with disabilities should be seen from the strict lens of fitting within a stipulated age category, or should they be seen on a case to case basis?
See, I think this is a slightly challenging issue in the sense that sometimes it may be the case that someone's disability, for example, let's say they sustain a disability when they are in college, okay, and because of that they are out of
Right.
college for a few years and then come back to pursue
Mm-hmm.
their education. In which case, by the time that they are eligible to apply for the roads, the age limit may have already passed.
Right.
Sometimes someone may have a temporary disability which might crop up from time to time, which may
Right.
prevent them from pursuing their education for a certain time period.
Correct.
So in those circumstances, I suppose it would make sense to have an exception to the age qualification. If this can be established with appropriate evidence that the person's disability is the reason why
Right.
they are unable to meet the age limit. Of course, the
Correct.
pushback against that would be the possibility of misuse, and the way to
Right.
deal with that would be to have, some mechanism, some screening
Mm-hmm.
mechanism to ensure that only deserving candidates are actually given this relaxation. So it is
Right.
something that should, I think, receive some attention
Right.
from the folks administering the Rhodes Scholarship in
Right.
India.
And one last question, if I may ask. Um, why, in your opinion, are there very few disabled lawyers? What efforts need to be taken at every level, at law schools, law firms, and at courtrooms to ensure diversity, equity, and inclusion, so that the cause of the disabled community is a continued issue being addressed?
Yeah, so I think this will require a multi-pronged approach.
Right.
First of all, we need to make it clear to people in school that law with disabilities, students with disabilities, that law is a viable career option for them, that
Right.
with appropriate support, they can succeed as legal professionals, even with disabilities.
Right.
Then we need to take steps to make the CLAT exam disabled friendly.
Right.
Now, Justice Chandrachud had brought this up in a speech that he gave on 3rd December 2020. And Professor Mustafa, who was the then convener of the CLAT NLU consortium, took it up also. And I read a report in Live Law that indicated that the 2021 iteration of the exam was disabled friendly from the perspective of the visually challenged. So that's great to see, but that's something that should continue. It can't just be a one-off thing that because there was public attention, therefore they, did it and then they regress. Because it can be very demoralizing for a disabled person if they pick up the question paper and if it is not designed with accessibility or their needs in mind, then that in itself will inhibit them from looking at the law as a viable career path for them. So we need to be very conscious about, we meaning the people designing the CLAT paper need to be very conscious about this and have an institutional approach on this.
Right.
Then within law school, we need to ensure that there are equal opportunity disability rights cells, as I had indicated earlier.
Right.
And that law students are put in touch with mentors who are legal professionals with disabilities who can handhold them through the challenges that they face. But otherwise, if you put a disabled student in a training for Manupatra or SCC, they end up not really knowing how they can use these platforms or how they can pursue internships or participate in moot court competitions. So what they need is specific uh, information that can help them acquire the know-how that is needed by them to flourish. And then we need to have law firms and legal employers that are sensitized about the needs of the disabled and that generally accept their legal obligations under the law in the bar and in academia. And I would recommend that you listen to Justice Chandrachud's speech in this regard, where he provided a detailed blueprint for what different actors in the legal profession need to do in this regard. It's available on YouTube. In the conference that was organized by ILS Law College Pune. So I think different actors in the legal profession need to contribute in this regard.
Right. Thank you so much for that, Rahul. It was a very insightful interview. Is there anything else that you would like to share before we end?
No, just that, I think it's extremely important to have supportive allies in the legal profession wherever one is working. And till now, by and large, I've had the good fortune of working with people who've provided me the additional support I needed. But we need to make sure that that is the case across the board, because only then can you actually effectively face the challenges that come from having a disability. Because sometimes you can just give into market pressure and not actually, support people with disabilities. I personally have been fortunate in that has not happened to me, but I know people to whom it has happened. So I think we need to all in the legal profession be very careful about this and make sure that we truly practice the value of diversity and equality that we teach.
Right. Thank you, Rahul. It was a pleasure having you on board.
Thanks, Jelsyna. I appreciate the opportunity.
Subscribe to our YouTube channel and click the bell icon.